Okay guys, so today I wanted to make a short video on the WCQ Berlin that just happened this weekend, talk about some trends that we're seeing in the meta, and also if you're a White Forest enjoyer, what that might mean for us, like what is our place in the meta, where is White Forest right now? First of all, in the NAWCQ, because we've only had two top tier events so far of the current Infinite Forbidden format, we have seen some major consistencies. So in the NAWCQ, of all 2,635 duelists, 25% of them were on Fiendsmith Snake Eye, and that jumped to 45% going into the top 64. In WCQ Berlin, it was 24% on Fiendsmith Snake Eyes day one, and that converted into a 49% in the top 64. Now, interestingly, Tenpai Dragon and Fiendsmith Yubel, which were the second and third decks in the overall deck breakdown for NAWCQ, so this was in Texas, that converted to 20% and 14%. So the second and third decks, Tenpai and Yubel, were exactly the same in WCQ Berlin. So we see in the day one breakdown, Tenpai is number 2, Yubel is number 3, and then in the top 64, Tenpai is still number 2 and Yubel is still number 3. It is kind of hard to comment on anything below that, to be honest, because the numbers of decks are so few that it's hard to argue that there's much statistical relevance beneath the top 3 decks here. But we did see that in the top 64 in Texas, the NAWCQ, there were Runic and Ritual Beast decks, and in the top 64 for Berlin, there were also Runic and Ritual Beast, and Memento as well, actually. I'm pretty sure, yeah, there was a Fiends with Memento here, at least one of them, and then also there was Memento here. So I guess like you could call that consistent, but those numbers are really low, so, you know, and the decks are also new, like the Ritual Beast cards got support, Memento got support. I guess, you know, Runic Stun, which seems to be the best performing version of Runic in these recent events, I don't really know if that's changed much, the playstyle of that deck. So we have a meta that is heavily solidifying right now, where Fiendsmith Snake Eyes is the best deck by far, Tenpai Dragon is well positioned, and Fiendsmith Yubel, I would say, is a good deck that is maybe not as well positioned as Tenpai is. So what do I mean by that? There's a difference between being a good deck and being a well positioned deck. If we look at the first place deck list from the WCQ Berlin, this is a Tenpai deck list, interestingly playing the 2 Fadra. So this was something that when I was going over profiles for Tenpai in the NAWCQ, there was no consensus on this. Like half the people were on 1 and half the people were on 2. This guy's also on 1 Genroku and 3 Pydra. So definitely not all agreed on this. But he is playing what is almost a win condition in Dimension Shifter. And then the only other rail hand trap he's playing is Perulia, which is not even like really a hand trap. It's something that works really well with breakers too. Like it works with both hand traps and breakers. And the only classic, like typical hand trap is Imperm, but this has much more synergy with the rest of the deck compared to like Ash Blossom or Ogre or whatever, because you can use this if your opponent goes first and you've drawn it. You can use it if you hold it and you're going second. You can use it if it's your 6th draw. You can send it off of droplets, and you can't do those things, like all 3 of those things, with a typical hand trap. So really, this is not even like, there aren't really true hand traps, let's say. Like in terms of his strategy and how the deck is supposed to work, there aren't like real hand traps here. And it's a very, very simple strategy of just using breakers or the D-Shifter win condition to OTK going second. White Forest, for example, like as a deck that didn't show up here, has a less clear win condition unless you're playing Calamity, but then you're a lot less resilient to interruptions, and even if you can still make a play, then you usually aren't getting to the Calamity. Whereas this deck can win off of a single card. So this deck is super well positioned, is the main point. They can play a very small amount of engine. They can play a card that is not only a win condition against many decks, but is basically almost a win condition against the best deck, which is Snake Eyes, and also main Perulia, which has guaranteed value, like at least a +1 against the best deck, because Snake Eyes will always normal summon, and they will always special from hand at least once. So like Snake Eyes, Ash, and Poplar, so you're getting 2 draws off of this. And maybe you force the opponent to not use a Black Witch if they had a Black Witch in hand, or maybe they have to, and so maybe you could even get 3 draws in some cases, or your opponent has to make a worse board so that you get less draws, in which case this card also did its job. So the D-Shifter, the Perulia, being able to play cards that Snake Eyes has a hard time playing around, because like if they make Desiree and they negate one of these breakers, you have so many breakers and droplets and imperm that you're probably going to have another breaker anyhow. And if you watched any of the games of the finalist here, Esteban Rey, what would normally happen is that he would be using multiple breakers every single turn. So this deck is very well positioned. I think maybe Yubel, you could argue, is slightly less well positioned because it doesn't have like as clear of a win condition against Snake Eyes, or like as clear of an unfair path to victory against Snake Eyes. So I feel like Yubel is an extremely good deck, and it's just being overshadowed right now because Fiends with Snake Eyes is the best deck. And then yeah, you can't really comment on the stuff that has less representation here. In terms of the White Forest stuff, there's the Runic version, which seems to be more popular, but again, there's so few entrants in these tournaments, and like so few people that are actually topping that it's really hard to say what's good or bad. But like, you know, here's a sample deck list I've been playing recently. You obviously have to play the White Forest cards if you're on a White Forest deck. You typically play the toy cards. You can play a Fiendsmith package in the main deck, which can be of any size depending on what you're going for. Like this, you could be playing more Tractus, you could be playing more Engraver, you could be playing one Engraver and nothing else in the main. I'm playing a very small package in this build, so there's no real clear path to how to deck build here, and there isn't a good example of gameplay. I think the Joshua Schmidt feature match, which was a Runic White Forest version, lost to a Runic Stun version, and yeah, so I would say that we are not well positioned because we lose to the same things that Fiendsmith Snake Eyes loses to. Like, we lose to D-Shifter. We get absolutely destroyed by Perulia because we special summon from the hand, or we summon from the hand all of the time. It's hard to play properly against Tenpai if you don't have a way to deal with the field spell. And playing around breakers is not like super easy. Chaos Angel, which normally gives you good insulation, where your synchro monsters are unaffected by monster effects activated by your opponent, like this also loses to the spell breakers that Tenpai is playing. Yubel tends to be a difficult matchup for us. So like the three best decks in the format are like Snake Eyes is just better. It's not that we have a bad matchup against them. They're just a better deck. We have a bad matchup against Yubel. And then it's just really hard to beat Tenpai with the amount of breakers that they can play and the type of cards that they play in their deck, like Perulia and D-Shifter. So right now, I would say, like, based on looking at these results, based on looking at what the meta looks like, and some general theory about what kind of conditions White Forest does not thrive in, I feel like we need to wait for a ban list and see what happens next. People are also starting to play Bestials in lots of decks, and obviously we are a light-based deck, so we get hit very hard by Bestials. Especially if you let's say you have one of your White Forest Synchros in the grave and you activate the Sylvia or the Rusia and they chain a Bestial to that, like that can hurt. Especially if you're on variants of the deck where you're only playing one Sylvia and one Rusia, and that is like normal in builds where you need a lot more space and you don't want to go over 40. And then even if you are playing multiples of them, it's such a huge tempo hit to lose one of these cards when you're in the middle of activating the effect. So yeah, D-Shifter, Perulia, breakers in general, Yubel being hard, like all these things make it to where this is not the time for White Forest, I think. Luckily, we are going to get a ban list in a few weeks, and I think that if Fiendsmith Snake Eyes is nuked, like if they really drop a massive ban list, which I think is somewhat likely because Rage of the Abyss is a massive power creep set with extremely powerful cards that they're obviously going to want to sell. So, if you're thinking from Konami's perspective, that set has to sell. And if they do nuke Fiendsmith Snake Eyes, then I guess we don't exactly know how the rest of the meta is going to change, because we might end up having a much more fair format, and then it's a lot less likely that the cards that really destroy us are going to be everywhere in the top decks in the meta, and you're just like losing to matchups basically. So yeah, I think the White Forest is actually a good deck. It has a lot of potential. but it is very poorly positioned, and that could change drastically with the next ban list. And then when Rage of the Abyss comes out, there are other cards that we can use, like the Azamina stuff, and we'll have to see how well we use that compared to how well other decks use that, because that will also be splashable. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any opinions on the current meta or how well positioned White Forest is, or something that I haven't covered. There's also a Discord in the description below where we mostly talk about White Forest stuff. So thanks for watching.